Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa la ya Rab subhanaka la ilmana illa ma'alamtana innaka antal alimul hakim rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli ba'd. Just a quick housekeeping as you're here. If you haven't done so already, you will see a QR code you can scan on these walls here. Inshallah, definitely sign up and connect with us. This is our third session today of the Oak Tree Institute Leadership Track. We are having sessions here today and tomorrow. And Oak Tree Institute, for those of you who don't know, and those of you who have heard me for 2 sessions now, now you have my pitch memorized. So Oak Tree Institute, we are a Muslim leadership and consulting group. Alhamdulillah, we train, advise, and consult Muslim organizations, Muslim leadership. Over the last 8 years, alhamdulillah, we've had the chance to work with more Muslim organizations than any other in this country. So alhamdulillah, we have collected many data points. We have spoken with, discussed, talked with, worked with so many of you and so many of our leadership and our organization institutions. And alhamdulillah, we have heard about the best, we have heard about the worst, and we've heard about our challenges and our strengths. So inshallah, what we're doing these 2 days, today and tomorrow, is we're sharing and unpacking with you some of the insights that we have gained collectively in the last 8 years, alhamdulillah. With that, we are talking about accountability and transparency. I want to make some remarks, inshallah, share some thoughts, and then I'll also pass it on to Sister Amana here, inshallah. I want to begin this afternoon by a incident that took place in the life of Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. This is after the conquest of Mecca. Rasulullah sends Khalid bin Walid on a mission to give da'wah to Banu Janima. They were a tribe that were very close to Mecca. And Rasulullah sent Khalid bin Walid, who is, by the way, a new Muslim at that time, and a general. And he sends him to give da'wah to this tribe. And he goes there with about 350 men, all are armed. And when he reaches Banu Jazima, the people, they feel a little bit nervous. They see these armed men coming, and they sort of have a miscommunication. So Rasulullah sent him on a da'wah mission, not on any kind of military expedition. However, seeing this 350 men armed and them being led by Khalid bin Walid, some of the members of the tribe, they felt that this is not a da'wah mission. They were already intending to become Muslim, by the way, but they felt nervous and scared, and they also took up arms. And in seeing that, this miscommunication kind of escalated, and Khalid bin Walid ended up taking into custody all the men, and this miscommunication continued because Khalid bin Walid then asked them, "Have you accepted Islam?" And normally they would say, "Aslamna." Yes, we did, we accepted. But they kept saying, "Saba'na," like we have changed our religion. We have changed our religion. Again, another escalation of miscommunication between the two parties, and eventually Khalid bin Walid ended up executing a number of men. This reached Rasulullah and he was extremely upset. In fact, Rasulullah, he raised his hand to the sky and he said, "Ya Allah, I have nothing to do with what Khalid did." And he sent Ali ibn Abi Talib to go and figure out and resolve the situation. In fact, another companion and Khalid bin Walid got into a little bit of altercation with the decision, and some of the men who were with Khalid bin Walid, they didn't comply with his command. The scholars, they say that Khalid bin Walid made an ijtihad. He made his best decision knowing the circumstance. He had a issue with that tribe from before, so he had some already preconceived notion and feelings about this tribe. And so when they took up arm, he thought to himself, these are fakes. They're not really accepting Islam. They are actually enemies. Rasulullah corrected this very quickly. There was a clear accountability immediately. Rasulullah rectified the situation immediately. And he, in fact, made good with this tribe afterwards. I say all of this to say that in our tradition we find the level of accountability and transparency and how serious Rasulullah, and we find the tradition he took when it comes to upholding justice. And no wonder we find the hadith in Sahih Muslim that man ra'a minkum munkaran falyughayyirhu biyadihi, that if someone sees injustice, let him change with his own hand, right? And this is actually one of the maqasid of our deen, of our sharia. When we think about what is the goal of our religion, one of it is la darara wa la dirara, that no harm shall be inflicted nor reciprocated. This is part of our deen, to uphold justice. So today we're talking about, obviously, on what's on back of all of our minds are some of the injustices, unfortunately, that takes place within our organizations and institutions that we are part of and we love and we care about. I just don't want to talk about the famous Quran teacher and the incident, because I think we have narrowed the challenges that we have in our community. It's not just the spiritual abuse. It's not just the violation of physical, emotional, exploitation of nature. It's beyond that. And so I want us to think a little more broadly about much more than just safeguarding and prevention of misconduct. There are a lot more areas that we need to think about for our organization, for our institutions. So I have categorized them in 5 areas, and I think when I discuss them with you, you will say, yes, I'm very aware. So the first area that we all know, and inshallah I would love for you to add what you have seen in the communities as well, is obviously the one that comes top of all of our minds: safeguarding and misconduct prevention. So physical, emotional, sexual, and spiritual harassment and exploitation. Truly, there's something that we need to address. A lack of child protection or supervision policies, sure. We have, in the work that we have done with organizations and institutions across this country, I've heard many things. I've heard many issues, many incidents. And we've heard, organizers tell us that there are male speakers who may be young and charismatic in nature. They talk about mental health, for example. They're giving a talk on mental health. Then a sister who is very vulnerable, young, reaches out to him afterwards. And then you know the rest of the story, how it can go in different direction. We have heard about children being left unsupervised during a program. We have heard about a janitor being hired whose background was in check. So that's just the protection of and safeguarding misconduct. But there's also legal, financial, operational compliance. So our organizations sometimes fail to meet legal obligations. Financial mismanagement, fraud, lack of transparency. Sometimes donations being used for personal gains. That happens. Sometimes leaders fail to report child abuse cases. Sometimes Sunday school teachers don't even know what they're mandated to report. Then we have professional conduct and workplace ethics. So in our community, it's quite rampant: favoritism, nepotism. Someone's salary as a staff of a masjid hired due to family connection. It's happening even in our professional organizations. Staff or leaders of boards make inappropriate jokes. Sometimes there's even discriminatory practices. I'm sure you have seen that. But then it also would think about safety of and digital security, right? Organizations that have online platform, how are we monitoring our inappropriate online interactions? Private messaging with donors. Obviously, facilities safety, lacking fire safety measures, inadequate supervision. But then there's one more layer after that, the final layer, which is about inclusive leadership. When it comes to accountability, transparency, it's not just about safeguarding against these ethical, legal violations. It's also about, do we have diverse representation in our leadership, right? Sometimes leadership is dominated by one group, right? They all went to the same medical school. Sometimes we fail to take input from vulnerable members of our community. So those are the comprehensive areas that we think about. We have a new administration coming in this country, that potentially, and we have seen some of the legislation that are being passed that were coming after nonprofits, especially Muslim organizations. So it's not enough just to talk about spiritual abuse. That's a very upfront, but we need to go beyond that. But think about accountability, transparency as a whole for all our organizations, because a lot more is happening than just that. Any other examples? Anything else that I missed? Anything else that comes to mind that concerns you? You don't have to name an organization, but anything else that comes to mind that we need to think about when it comes to accountability and transparency for our organizations? Zakat fund, yes, that's a black hole for many organizations, unfortunately. Yeah, what else? Anything else? We have to be willing to talk about this openly. And I know it's, it's a little bit sensitive to talk about this in this way. And we love our organizations, we love our leaders on our boards, everyone that's putting in hard work. But this is how we rectify. This is how we grow. This is how we evolve as Muslim community. Protection of our rivers, absolutely. That there are a number of population by the very nature. There are vulnerable communities, vulnerable population, minors, women, reverts, and we need to have a special consideration. Even when you run healthcare facilities, and one point in my life I used to be in healthcare management. There are special laws for vulnerable population. You have to have special policies for people who are dealing with disability and so forth. So absolutely, we don't have those thoughtfulness in our organization at all.
We don't think it's important.
We don't think it's important, yeah.
We don't think it's important. We say we think it's important that children don't get abused by their teachers or their spiritual leaders, but we're not willing to pay for training, we're not willing to spend time on training. The board members are saying, don't understand they have a legal responsibility.
Yeah.
The board members are not aware of their legal responsibility, and people are trying to hide instead of expose the problems being done. And this, again, I think people don't want to think about it, and that's why we're always reacting when something happens. And often we only act when it's in the New York Times or Washington Post, not when a sister said, hey, I've got a problem. My child, something's happened to my child. We have to wait until finally it gets on the non-Muslim media, and then we pretend that it doesn't happen, we hide everything. We need to be open about it. The problem with the Roman Catholic Church wasn't that the kids were just abused, which is a horrendous problem. It systematically tried to hide it. And now it's using lawfare and legal stuff to prevent responsibility from being going. And I think that's something, we're not in the Muslim community, but if we don't do something, we're going to go in that direction.
Absolutely, absolutely. Accountability transparency is huge. And even to add to that, the Generation Z and millennials want to see transparency, and they will not be involved with our organizational institutions. And we're talking about this morning about succession planning. If they see that masajid and institutions are not transparent, don't have accountability and checks and balances in place, they're just not going to be involved, not going to be engaged, not going to be interested in being part of any of it. Any final thoughts on this? Okay, brother here and the sister.
Ties kind of into what you said about safeguards. If we have a Muslim, somebody in the community should be able to start a non-profit work with the Muslim as the address, and nobody knows what they're doing with that.
That's the first time I'm hearing.
That's a new one. I have heard all kinds. This is a new one, mashallah.
Do you think that maybe we're just going to need another generation that replaces that old generation who came from overseas to really do that big change? Because I think it's always a struggle when you have someone within the board, they want to make a change and they cannot because all the board members have like a different mentality, right? And then maybe you just need the next generation to pick up the, what they did, which they do a lot of good things, but, they're resistant to change. So could it be that maybe we'll find less issues once the new generation takes over?
Well, that's a hopeful thought. but I think we have seen, and this is, by the way, these abuses, these violations of ethics are not a Muslim problem only, and I think this is one of the big challenges and big misunderstanding. There are plenty of these, and brother here just mentioned about the Catholic Church and so forth. So this is a human problem, but what we are missing is mechanisms and process and policies and procedures, and then the training to go with it, right? Subhanallah, that's a hopeful thought, and I get that, and I think the Generation Z and millennials will come with their own set of problems, right? But we need to do something now because people are being harmed, and things are happening. There are violations of legal violations, ethical violations right now. So we can't wait for for that. Inshallah, hopefully we start now and it continues to grow and evolve and get better. Inshallah. Final thought. Yeah.
So I think policies and procedure is the key here, because if you have a policy for bullying, policy for child abuse, policy for zakat distribution, policy for harassment, all kinds of harassment, and those policies are respected as an organization, then you don't need a second generation. I think, in my opinion, I think dismissing the generation that came from back home and their achievements and what they've achieved for us so far is not just to them, to their efforts and their contributions. And putting the responsibility on the next generation 100% is also not fair to them either. So we need to develop the processes that they come in. There's an established set of, like for example, Boy Scouts, youth protection and double deep, two deep leadership. There is no compromise there. And if the organization is run that way, then you could actually build for the future.
I think if there's value, absolutely, I think we can be hopeful for the future, and we start working now, inshallah. That's something.
I'm referring to definitely the policy, but when let's say, the masjid board is not open to the idea.
The change
of
and,
policies,
yeah.
Policies and procedures.
Sometimes you have to have a hostile takeover. I'm kidding. I jokingly sometimes advise this to young professionals who come to me, like my community, the Amus, I say you have a hostile takeover. But anyways, I'm kidding, half kidding. Sister in the back. You had something? No. Did I miss somebody? Yes, last one, sorry.
If you look at the example of Islam in South Africa, that's 4 generations. Islam in England, 3 generations. It didn't matter how many generations. Sometimes we assume that all the guys from overseas, they've got, those problems go inherited to their sons and to their daughters. So again, I'm just saying historically, the Boy Scouts was another one, unfortunately, on my list with the Catholic Church. Both of them have employed people to shut down any lawsuit against them. So they've been here for many generations. So
that's true. Yeah.
I don't think it's about that. I think it's about accepting it's a human problem. Doesn't matter what color, religion, age you are. Absolutely. And the recent example from a couple of months ago, he was a young man.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. And subhanAllah, especially, and I will say this, it's a little bit sensitive, but I have to say it. It's also not a particular brand of Islam problem. I have seen, especially after this recent incident, people are blaming certain institutions and almost trying to say that my institution is better. But I have seen across the country, different institutions go through these challenges from all range. The Tablighis, the Sufis, the Salafis, you name it, any leaning, I have seen those problems. And those problems also are, in our countries as well. And so that's number one. Number two, also I haven't seen a lot of pushback saying this is a problem with the celebrity imam issue. It's also not necessarily true. That's a very shallow way of looking at this. And I think we can unpack this for the next 1 hour. But suffice to say is that this is not the problem because we have some imams and speakers who have gotten a big platform of popularity. If that was the case, then what we're saying is we want to make sure that our scholars and imams don't have that kind of public, pull and capacity. But let's leave it for athletes, entertainers, and others, right? They should be having the same problem, right? And in fact, that is actually one of the challenges when we have seen this, and we'll talk more about this in our mentorship session next week, tomorrow, is that many of our leaders and speakers and imams and activists are operating solo. They don't have a group that they're part of. And what happens is that you don't have accountability, and shaitan, he can impact anyone. And I think so. When you think about how do we help our all-star imams and speakers, how do we help them navigate the public pressure? There are agencies that help entertainers, athletes to manage their life, manage their pressure that they feel when dealing and being public, because we need influence and publicity for some of our folks in the good cause. Anyways, coming back to the topic, I want to wrap it up here by saying that, inshallah, it's not, we need to be comprehensive about what we do. And we have to look at it not just about, mashallah, there have been a lot of good articles and speeches, and you'll hear all of them ends with, we got to do something, or it's time for a change, or we need training. But we need to be a little more concrete than that. There are a number of areas we need to tackle as an organization, as an institution. It has to do with the governance, so the board oversights, reviews. It has to do with policy and compliance, right? It has to do with trainings and awareness. We've been all saying it, right? It has to do with operations and safety as well. How do we create some of those background checks, assign safety monitors and so forth? And also it's about engaging the community, right? How do you host town halls? How do you share transparent reports? Those are all part of this effort, right? It's not just calling the speakers to action or calling certain individuals to action. That's very shallow. We need to go a lot more comprehensive than that. I want to just quickly chat with you about, as I end here, because we talked about this issue of especially spiritual abuse and so forth. If you looked at the Sirah, and we find that there was a incident where Rasulullah, a woman came to him and with a baby, and Rasulullah took her to a little bit of a side and had a chat with her about her private matter. The companions could see him, Rasulullah and the woman, but couldn't hear what he was talking about. And subhanAllah, that's something we need to think about, that there are ways, and it's a very simple example, there are ways how we can make, where a community has only a male counselor, or the imam, and we do work on that, but there are ways to think about that. Ibn Taymiyyah had a female student, we all know, the famous Zainab Fatima bint Abbas, was a very prominent student of Ibn Taymiyyah, a male scholar. In fact, he used to prepare extra for her because she would ask a lot of challenging questions, right? We know Darda, Caliph Abdul Malik used to attend her teachings. And we know the incident, if oftentimes is talked about in the famous incident by Aisha Anha and Safwan al-Mu'tal, it's an incident about an emergency case. And we find so much beautiful approaches in our tradition. The last thing I'll tell you here, another fascinating incident in my mind is when Rasulullah Rasulullah was riding a camel, and behind him was Al-Fadl bin Abbas, a young man. This was on the 10th of Dhul Hijjah. And a woman, and the narration says a beautiful woman, came to ask Rasulullah for an advice. And Al-Fadl bin Abbas, a young man, he was staring at her. Rasulullah turned his face, right? Continue advising the woman, and then they moved forward. That's the end of the hadith. What's amazing the scholars talk about is that one, the hadith talks about her beauty. It never is once said that why this woman showing up in this way, she should be covering up more, or any of those reprimands of any kind. Two, there isn't a whole rebuke of Al-Fadl either. It was a prevention. Okay, turn your face. You know you're a young man with a lot of hormones. Rasulullah is physically putting barrier and continuing forward. Very practical, very thoughtful. And I think when we think about how do we create safeguards, in our communities, policies and procedures that need to balance the reality of the availability of male teachers, imam counseling, young people, and I'm not talking about young people who are interacting, and a lot of time we get very worried. And how do we have trainings that to help our leaders and organizers develop more ethical, moral compass, right? SubhanAllah, I think a lot of these incidents and a lot of discussions have forced even many male leaders to think twice about their own interaction, and maybe unintentionally, and I say the word unintentionally, they've been lax even about the way they've been following the code of conduct that we have in our tradition. And inshallah, I hope that all these discussions forces us to do things, challenge our own selves, and also inshallah have better transparency and accountability. With that, inshallah, I want to pass it over to Sister Amana. Just a quick introduction to Sister Amana. She specializes in board governance and nonprofit management. MashaAllah, she, as an entrepreneur, she has established Baraka Cafe and Bloom Espresso, which was a successful launch within the Islamic Society of Orange County. Additionally, she was the former chair of CARE California, providing visionary leadership, spearheading strategic planning. She holds a Master of Science in Environmental Health Science and a Bachelor of Science in Applied Ecology. MashaAllah, her commitment to leadership and governance is further supported by Nonprofit Management Certificate from Center of Nonprofit Management. We are very honored and excited for Sister Amana to have joined our team this year. So without further ado, Sister Amana.
Okay, assalamu alaikum everybody. I see a lot of familiar faces. Bravo to everybody that did first session, second session, and third session. You're going to come out leaders and experts and be able to do this with us. So again, my name is Amana. So Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I really wanted to come with the lens from the board. How many of you guys, if you can raise your hand, are currently serving on a board? All right, so about half of the room. How many of you guys are staff of any organization, nonprofit? Okay, I only have 1, 2, 3, okay. And then how many people are just interested because this is something that interests them and they want to prevent things? Okay, that's great. And what is it specifically that brought you when you saw the title?
I think as for me, I think the common ideas that you guys are bringing here today would be perhaps things that we are experiencing in our community. So there's a lot of commonness that perhaps things I can take home with me after this session. For my
How about you, sir?
Like the gentleman mentioned earlier, our community, the elders don't like this stuff. We know the problems solved because of lack of accountability, and anytime there's like, so that's just about it. We don't want to talk about it. And so shame things happen or are not involved.
So there's lack of transparency is what I'm hearing. Also that we want things to get better. We want to learn how to do systems and procedures better. How many of you guys at your work have taken sexual harassment training? Is it required? Right? Okay, how many of you guys have an HR person at your company that you can report things to? How many people know who they can report things to at their local masjid? Okay, no one raised their hands. But at your place of work, right, you know, maybe you don't feel comfortable, but you know who to go to, right? That's a whole nother topic about repercussions of reporting. That's another whole session. But at your masjid that you go to, if you see something, you do not know what to do, right? So as a board member, I currently serve on one board right now. I also believe that you shouldn't serve on too many boards at the same time because really, how much energy can one person give? On the board that I was serving on, CARE California, we made it mandatory for every staff member and board member to go through sexual harassment training, okay? That was one thing. Because how many of you guys have had any training in boards? Because I'm about to say some terms, so I want to make sure if I have to define them. Has anybody done like specific board trainings? Okay, so since it's not that many, when you join a nonprofit board, usually by your state, so I'm in the state of California, I am legally and fiduciary responsible for the board. So there's 3 areas. It's duty of care, duty of loyalty, and duty of obedience. How many of you have heard those terms before? Okay, so the people that went to their training, that's great. When I say duty of care for the people that went, what does that mean?
That you have the best interest as the organization. You have to care
You have the best interest of the organization before your own personal self, right? I am not joining this board for the personal gain of myself. I am joining this board with the mission and vision of this organization to move forward, right? So that's when conflict of interest forms. If it's something personally going to affect you, you remove yourself. That's duty of care. What's duty of loyalty? You're the gentleman in the back.
At the end of the day, you're going to do what's best interest for the company, for the organization. You're going to be loyal to the bylaws and the operating of that organization.
So you're loyal to your organization's mission and vision, right? Because sometimes it happens, you'll be on your board and you know it's outright not going to benefit you, right? And you're like, man, that's actually going to hurt me. Might hurt my business if I'm on a policy. But you know what? For the greater good of who we're serving, this system and procedure is good. But for me personally, not the best, but I'm not thinking about myself. Also, it can be reversed. If it's going to benefit you, you have to say that, right? If I have an IT firm, I probably cannot bid on the organization that I am a part of, or I have to make sure everybody knows that, yes, this is going to benefit me, but I'm still the best and I should still be considered, right? Now, the last one, duty of obedience. Can anybody define what duty of obedience is?
Fulfill or do what agreed on in the organization's decisions.
Yes, and there's one other thing. So you have to do with what you're tasked to do, but you are legally responsible for what's going to happen to the people that you are serving, right? So I'm sure things are happening. As a board member, you don't know, right? You don't know what's happening day to day, but you are still responsible for those actions of the staff, of the volunteers. It's a huge weight. And as that, all of these things that we're talking about all fall under duty of obedience. When we talk about systems and procedures, yes, we can have a system and procedure, but if it's not being implemented because you don't have the checks with the staff, you are still going to be held accountable, right? So we had in the last session about change management. That's working with the people. So we can make all of the systems, we can make all of the documents, but if we are not there making sure that those things are happening on the levels, then we are still responsible to our constituents. So one instance, one easy one, a lot of organizations already do it. I'm part of Girl Scouts of Orange County in California. I am a volunteer. I had to get a live scan, right? It was a pain. I really didn't want to do it, but in order for me to be with my troop, I had to get a background check. I got fingerprinted, I went, did the questionnaire, gave them all of it. I had to do my background check. Now, if your employment tells you you have to do a background check, will you do it? If your masjid asks you to do a background check, will you have the same excitement? Yes, Brother Anwar will have the same excitement. I wouldn't mind, but I can guarantee you the amount of people that feel insulted, you are expecting me to get a background check? Do you already know who I am? It doesn't matter. So this is where, as a board or a position of leadership, you have to say, I got my background check. How many of you guys know Dr. Haifa Yunus? She came to our masjid right after the incident and talked about it, and she said, I did my background check as a physician because that's what's expected of me, and I expect that everybody will do that background check, right? So it's not about who you are, it's about going through the systems and the procedures, and the best example comes from the leadership. So I hope to my board members that are in this room that not only will you just implement that one simple tool, live scan, it's very simple, on nominal cost, should be in the budget of all of your staff members, of anybody dealing with a minor. It's very simple. Sunday school teachers, volunteers, youth group, anybody that has any interaction with a minor, have the live scan. And if they choose not to do it, what are you gonna do? I'm so sorry, you cannot volunteer or work for us until you complete this task. And guess what? I did it. I know it's a pain, but I went out. It's really not. It just takes about 20 minutes of your life. On your way, you get your fingerprint, and then you feel good. You can say, I got my background check, and now you should too, right? So simple things where leadership is held accountable to themselves. Now, how do you make sure that happens? Who's keeping track? How often is it happening? That's where you have to figure it out in your systems and your procedures, right? Assigning, if you're an organization that has the luxury of having staff, your job after every quarter is to present to the board the list of everybody. And guess what, guys? They expire. It's not something you do once. Those are things that we can do. And that's one easy answer. But do you think we're going to solve the problem by just getting background checks? No. The problem is still going to happen. And this is where we have to be okay with that. As Muslims, as humans, we are not going to be able to stop everything. But what we can do is make sure that we are setting up ways to hold people accountable. Number one, I asked you this question. Do you know who to report to if you see something at your local masjid? No. So if you are part of a masjid, have you guys heard of the term ombudsman? They have them on college campuses, right? Maybe that's a position that you have at the masjid, and then you let everybody know, this is our ombudsman. So let me ask you guys, for the people that have heard the word ombudsman, can anybody give me a definition?
They advocate for essentially people in an institution that have a concern that need a representative officially through the informal channels, right?
Right. So basically, they are the advocate, and they're the person that's helping the local community. So at a college campus, an ombudsman is taking care of the student population. They have ombudsmans for different areas.
And generally the word ombudsman is somebody that's outside the normal structure that can come in and doesn't have a conflict of interest.
Right.
So if your manager and director are behaving badly, it's like quality control.
Quality control, that's a great way to look at it. They are there really without any conflict of interest, and there to protect and serve. Sometimes it might be wise as Muslims to have a female ombudsman and a male ombudsman. You might have somebody that's older, and you just have this committee. Right? We are solving a problem today, guys. What is the one problem that all of us have? We don't know where to go to in our masjid to report a problem. Now, I don't know how many of you guys are going to be able to walk over to your local masjid board and say, hey, I found a problem and here's the solution. That's a whole nother topic, but really at least you're starting to understand that there is a problem, we can figure out a solution, and we have to let everybody know, right? You might want to even go to find out from your masjid, they might be already doing live scan. Wouldn't it be reassuring to know that as a member of your organization? Oh, you already did that? Why don't you tell us at the next Jummah khutbah or in your next newsletter? So there are wins that are happening that we need to just be well aware of. And if you are in those positions of power, think about that so that your local community can know what they should be doing. We talked about, I think we were going to try to break out into sessions. Should we go ahead and try to do that now? I'm going to give you one last example as we break out, because I really want you guys to talk to each other about your local concerns and issues and somehow work on a way to go back and figure it out, because I bet you, even though betting's not allowed, that we're all facing very similar issues and concerns. So one other thing I wanted to talk about was boards. How many of you guys know how to get on the board of your masjid if your masjid lets you have open elections? Okay. How many people want to get on the board of their masjid, or they want to do some part of leadership? It's really important to understand and figure out in your local institutions to take that initiative to find out who the leadership is. So that would be my recommendation for the first step. This is where DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. How many people have heard that word? If you work, you probably have. DEI in the Muslim world is very different than DEI and maybe in the nonprofit, regular American, We are not made of boards of all white males, right? Our boards aren't looking like that, but what are they looking like? What is our norm? Males. Okay, some people are South Asian. Old. ethnic background. First generation, same ethnicity, right? That's what we are trying to solve, right? We are trying to make boards more diverse, equitable, and inclusive, even though for us, it's not all white males, right? So understanding that DEI is still a very important topic for us to talk about, and the best way to do it is to have an internal look. So if you are in a position of leadership, the amount of responsibility on you is very great. You have to look at it introspectively and see to yourself, am I representing the people I'm serving? There's a study that shows, for nonprofits in general, that 74% of boards, the makeup, they have nobody of who they're serving, right? So let's say I'm serving the underprivileged community of South LA, but my board is all white males. Is that a problem? Me as a white male, do I understand what an underprivileged person in South LA is going through? But yet I'm going to save them, right? So the boards have to look like the people they are serving. I'm going to give you an example of the Ummah Community Clinic. How many people have heard of that? It's a community clinic in South LA. Their board actually has patients that have gone through the system of Ummah Clinic so that they can tell what it's like to go through the system, right? It's not made up of just doctors. It's made up of everybody that they're trying to serve. So it takes that introspection and looking at ourselves. Now, you're going to say, my masjid board is not going to listen to me. They're not going to know what I'm going to say. They just want to run it. And that's going to be an issue that you have to decide if you're willing to really tackle. It might be easier to start your own. That's a whole nother discussion. It might be, no, I grew up in this masjid and I want it to succeed. Because guess what's happening? We are not the only diaspora to come here and go through these problems and then we don't know what's going to happen. The Christian community, do you guys know that the amount of churches that are closing? It's a lot. It is going up because the churches, people aren't coming to worship anymore. Alhamdulillah, inshallah, Allah prevents that from happening to us, that our masjids will still have people to come. But do you want your masjid to only be full on Jummah? Probably not, because we're not going to be able to sustain that real estate. So we have to look at ways to keep the masjids open, and if the generations that established it, they put in their hard-earned money, they bought the land, they made the building, and the last thing I think that they would want to do is see it close, right? So we need to have those candid conversations. They're going to be hard. And I'm looking at you. I could see that you have it in you, that you want to have those hard conversations, have that conflict, because conflict is where we're going to grow, right? It's okay. Be respectful, understand. Really, the amount of work that our generations that have done before us is amazing. There's no way that I can actually gather that much money, buy land, build a masjid, but what I can do is really help their legacy, and that's how you want to frame it. So I really do think it's not going to be easy, and it's a fight that I think is worth it because we all have the intention to please Allah and to have our institutions grow and not be scared of problems and conflicts. So there's a lot of tools. HR companies have these tools, require your board to do the sexual harassment training because that's really the first level of leadership, require your staff to do the sexual harassment training, get these documents, have them sign it so that you can protect the institution and therefore protecting yourself. Because at the end of the day, the board members are legally and fiduciary responsible for the people that they serve. And if that requires there's a problem and you need to step down, it's okay. Because remember, it's not about you. It's about the longevity of the organization, and you want the organization to keep going.